start the recording here. So with the remaining time, I'm going to try to finish up with the rest of the slides for your exam next week. So this is going to go through rather quickly. Okay, so we're talking about oxygen death and that the amount of oxygen needed by the liver cells used to accumulated lactic acid is produced back to glucose. Okay, so you have to pay back that debt. And remember, Corey's cycle describe how lactic acid produced by the skeletal muscle um, is uh, put into the blood, and blood will flow very well if you have skeletal muscle contraction. And the lactic acid will goes to the liver, which is converted back to glucose, and glucose is put into the blood, so then it goes to the skeletal muscle. Muscle fatigue is the I defined for you already inability to contract, and this is commonly caused by ions imbalance, particularly if you have accumulations of lactic acid. And cramp may cramp is that sustained involuntary muscle contraction. Now you can prophylactically, I suppose, if you eat a lot of banana, which has a lot of potassium, which is to a ways to in a expectation that if you do have a lot of lactic acid, you might be prevent cramping. That's the idea. Okay. Some people think, yeah, eating banana will uh, prevent you from having cramp. You have a lot of potassium. When the skeletal muscle contraction is needs is ATP, okay, and ATP is needed for three places. I told you, one is to causes the myosin to detach from actin, two is in the power stroke, and three is to shuttle calcium back to sarcoplasmic reticulum. In fact, one of the things that you often see in that is after the person died, right? So, and it usually say 2 to 4 hours after death, they cannot produce any more ATP. As such, you don't have ATP to cause myosin to be released from actin. So that's why a person might have what we consider as a condition known as rigor mortis. Okay, rigor mortis is mean stiff after death. And that is due to the lack of ATP, so that the you cannot cause myosin to detach from actin. The Whenever you generate hydrolysis ATP, will generate heat, and so if your core body temperature drop and the body trying to attempt to bring up the core antibody, sorry, core body temperature, you have um, shivering response. And shivering is just hydrolysis of ATP and not necessarily involved in contraction movement, if you will. Okay. And of course, you know that heat is transported via um, the blood. Blood carries a lot of heat. Keep that in mind. Now, the remaining time we'll talk about the um, physiology. One of the most important things, particularly muscle that have striation, keep this in mind. Muscle that has striation, which is cardiac myocyte and skeletal muscle, is subject to link tension relationship. And what link tension relationship is refers to that um, the sarcomere in general will have its optimal length for contraction. If you overstretch the sarcomere, so then in this case, let's say there's a little bit overlap between myosins and actin, then the contraction is going to be weaker. So if you look, this is contraction versus the uh, fiber length. There is an optimal length. If it's too long, longer than 2 micron, you're going to get weak contraction. If it's too short, you can see there's not a lot of sliding movement. It's not going to have very good contraction. So in this case, you know, it is recommended that you don't bend your back and pick up something. If you have to lift a heavy, 30 or 40 pound, you use your quadricep to lift it, which is your leg. You don't want it to bend over, which is you stretches your muscle fiber, right? And then if you're going to lift it up with carrying a weight, you can damage that muscle back over time, right? So overstretch it, you're going to have weak contraction. So keep in mind that um, the striation is subject to length tension relationship. If it's there is certain length with have maximum contraction, and I will talk next time to cardiac myocyte and how cardiac myocyte, if it's not filled with blood, it's at suboptimal length. But when it's filled with blood, the heart is filled with blood, it stretches it out so that it's at its optimal length, so that it's contraction. So the idea here is that the heart contracts well if it's filled with blood. If it doesn't fill with blood, it's going to have a weak contraction. Okay, so if you take a muscle like the gastrocnemius of a frog and you're going to hook it up to a myogram, myos refers to muscle gram in graph, and give it a stimulus, and you will see that it will contract and then there's relax. Okay, now that stimulus that you're going to provide a stimulus here, for example. Okay, now you can crank up the voltage, right? Let's say 1 millivolt is not going to contract, 2 millivolt is not going to contract, 3 millivolts is not going to contract. But at some point, let's say 5 millivolt is going to cause it to contract. Now you created a 6 millivolt, it's not going to give it a higher contraction. It's just a contract. So in other words, contraction is an all or non response. You see here, right? So it's not going to contract higher. If it's contract higher, we're going to say that a stronger force. And I posed the question earlier, what are two ways to increases the strength of contraction? Well, one way is to increases motor unit, but the other way is to increases the frequency of stimulation. Okay, and what I mean by that is that this, we can look at this way. So let's say that we say that this is the time on this, okay, and this is the force of contraction. So if I uh, crank up the voltage and I stimulate here, I will see there's a contraction and there's a relaxation, okay? And I do it interval, contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation, okay? So let's say that this is every second. So 1 second, 2 seconds, and 3 seconds. Okay. So let's say I do it every half a second. So I can get a contraction, relaxation, and contraction and relaxation. So that's every half a second, right? Now let's say if I do it at every quarter of a second, so 1.25. You see, this is 1.25 second. This is 1.5 second. I still have contraction. So this is contraction and full relaxation, right? But I could have a type of contraction that should it contract, right? Should it contract and increases the frequency so that now if it contract here, before it's fully relaxed, it's going to contract again. And I do that again, it's going to contract like this. You can see here, this normally have partial relaxation, partial relaxation, partial relaxation. Okay, this is known as the tetanus, if you will. Okay, and then if you continue going, then this is the maximum contraction where there is no relaxations at all, and that's again tetanus. Okay, so now you know there's two ways that you can increases the strength of contraction. One is to let me write this down. So two ways to increase the strength of contraction. Motor unit recruitment and to increase the frequency. Frequency means more often, okay, of stimulation. Not necessarily more voltage, not a higher voltage in contraction, but frequency, if you will. And so this then will show you the, if you look at the myogram, and right, uh, here's your normal contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation, contraction. But if you created a more frequent stimulation, so that if you stimulate this during relaxation, you see this. So this wave, it seems like it's added. So we call that summation. Yes, summations are added, and so then you could continue stimulate, and you can see there's no relaxation at all. This is known as tetanus. Okay, tetanus. This is different than this because you can have this type. It's known as contraction, relaxation, but then this contraction is higher and in full relaxation, and then contraction, relaxation. So in this case, this is known as trepe. What do you think might cause this trepe? What might cause trepe? Do you guys know? Is anybody here?
We here, Professor. Just I don't know the answer. I'm sorry.
Yes, we are here. You say your car?
Huh? Halen, what might causes the trepe, you think? What might cause trepe? Does anybody know? I thought someone raised their hand. Marcia?
I was gonna say, so basically, like maybe just not being able to contract.
No. I'm asking you why you might see this contraction, relaxation, but this contraction is higher, and this contraction is higher, and this one is full relaxation. This is different. This is higher, but there's shorter relaxation. Okay, so this phenomenon is known as tetanus. This phenomenon is trepe, and we know this is due to increases the frequency. But what might cause this? Tension is increased. Yes, the tension is increased, but what causes the tension to increase?
A higher voltage. The lower.
No, not higher voltage. It's actually, this is your example of motor. Not necessarily more calcium. It's more is motor unit. So in this case, what you see here is that you might say that only this three muscle fiber is working. This one, and this one. Whereas this one is might be four muscle fibers working. And this is the maximum muscle fiber working. Okay. So in fact, when an athlete take advantage of how does an athlete take this as an advantage of Treppe, is actually this is what warming up is. Warming up, warming up is where rather than to go from zero muscle contraction, all the way to 100 muscle contraction in 10 seconds or 15 seconds for 50 millivolt for 50-meter dash with Hussein Bolt. What he does is if you do your warm up, you are kind of like causes all your motor unit ready to go. And so then when the gun it goes off, boom, you're ready to go. You see that? So Treppe is due to more motor unit recruitment, but it's a way, from exercise point of view, it's a warm-up period. So that in a warm-up, you're recruiting all your motor unit to you're ready to contract your muscle. Okay? All right, so keep that in mind.
So are you saying, Professor, that that's not as rapid movement as the first diagram and the second diagram? Like, can you explain it like in as far as which diagram, the first one, the second one, or the third one, how do they go in order? Like you were using a runner, for example. So can you just emphasize on that?
Okay, 1, 2, 3 you refer to here?
Yes.
Okay, 1, 2, 3 meaning that, so if you look at the force of contraction, do you agree that this is the maximum force of contraction? It's much higher,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do you get this higher? What you do in here, the difference between 1 and 2 is that you increases the frequency of stimulation because you're going to stimulate it during the relaxation period. So you get an added effect known as summation. Okay. And so, in fact, in our body, if you want the skeletal muscle to contract a lot, the motor neuron is keepingly fire, 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 fire. Okay?
Yes.
That's physiologically firing a lot to get this tactiness, right?
Yes.
But here in this case, Treppe, I'm talking about this is the cross sections of the bicep brachii, for example, right? In that bicep brachii, you can see there are hundreds, if not thousands, of muscle fiber. And remember, when we talk about motor unit, what is a motor unit? Is a motor neuron innervated a group of muscle fiber. So in this case, you can have one motor unit innervate three muscle fiber, right? So when you cause that one motor unit to contract, it only gives you this much tension. But if you cause two motor unit, it's going to give you this much tension. If you can get maximum motor unit recruitment, you're going to get maximum tension. And so a warm-up period is the period in which the athlete recruiting the maximum motor unit to get his muscle ready to go, right? And he's at the starting point, all the motor unit ready to go. As soon as the gun goes off, boom, all that muscle fiber contract at one time to get him go in 50-meter dash in 15 seconds, or maybe less than 15 seconds. I don't know how fast this Usain Bolt does it. Carl Lewis can do it probably in 14 seconds. Okay, so do you understand the difference between Treppe versus tetanus? Treppe,
The thing is, okay, so you're saying on the first diagram, uh, it's sort of like just regular
yeah,
muscle movement. The second one is where the frequency is building and then the
Increases the frequency of stimulation.
third one is plentiful motor units, a lot, like firing from
Yeah.
the neuron. And so basically, like all the muscles are stimulated, like a lot of muscles are stimulated all at the same time on the third diagram.
What's the third? You say C here?
Yes,
What,
sorry, C.
no. C, A, B, and C is talking about frequency, whereas D is motor unit. So this is D. This is different.
Oh,
A, B, and C is refers to frequency. So if you don't know this, but look at the stimulation here. The time of stimulation is getting closer and closer, right? So every contraction, you have contraction, relaxation. But is a contraction and it's relaxing and you stimulate, it's going to go higher. And the difference here is the frequency, right? Frequency means the more frequency, the less of the time in between. So here's like 1 minute interval, well, this is every a quarter of a second interval. That's what frequency is. Frequency is cycle per second, if you will, you define as in hertz, right? Does that make sense or no? Frequency.
yes, I'm trying to understand. I have to read more about this because um, it's a little complicated. It's not so straightforward, so I definitely have to research this. Thank you.
Okay. Um, so a contraction, so summation is, and you can say in the case of A scenario, if you will, this is full relaxation, right? So in other words, I am stimulated here, and I stimulated here, I stimulate here. Every time I stimulate, I get a contraction. But what if during the middle of relaxation, I cause it to stimulate again? Then it's going to be higher. So that's known as the added. So in other words, tetanus contraction is contraction. There's no relaxation. That's the maximum frequency that you can stimulate the muscle to contract. Whereas this, so in this case, you can see that there is no full relaxation. This is only partial relaxation. In this case, you get contraction, full relaxation, contraction, full relaxation, contraction, full relaxation. But these three different events is because there are more motor unit is recruited. All right, so recruitment of motor units is to increases the number of motor unit activated. So a whole muscle composed of many unit. Um, and motor unit recruitment is a very highly organized process. And that is the smaller motor unit recruited first, and then you get the bigger. Oyinesi, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. You said the tripede is when is like moderate, right? And the
Trapeze is what?
when the motor unit is going moderate, it's not like high as tetanus, right?
No. That's what I'm saying. Motor unit, TRIPE is motor unit recruitment.
But I'm talking about the frequency.
So there's two ways to increases the strength of contraction. One way is to increases the frequency of stimulation. Here you get maximum, right? Right? Here's the maximum contraction.
Yes, it
And
is.
this is increases frequency. Boom, that's done. Another way is to increase motor unit. And so here's a higher contraction than this. What's the difference between this one and this one? This one is maybe 3 motor unit, and this is 1 motor unit.
Okay.
So increasing or recruiting motor unit will give you a phenomenon you see is known as TREP.
Okay, the process of increasing the modern units is what is TRIP.
In the myogram, you see this phenomenon is known as TREP,
Yeah.
and you explain TREP is because of motor unit. In the myogram, you see this, you see this, you see this, and you see this. And how do you explain this? I
The,
explain this because you increases the frequency. Yeah. I
yeah.
explain this because I have more motor unit. Okay. Are you clear now or no? All right. You think about it. Um, Motor unit recruitment, in other words, to increases the strength or contraction. Um, and the recruitment is very organized, and that is you usually recruited a smaller motor unit first, and then you get a larger motor unit. And the difference is that a smaller motor unit, meaning a motor neuron, and a smaller numbers of uh, myocyte, tend to do much faster than a large motor unit that usually require a larger axon. Um, it takes longer. So it causes the muscle in your back to contract all at the same time, for example, is much longer or slower than it causes the muscle in your eyelid, for example. And because of these motor unit recruitment allows you to have a smooth as opposed to a jerky motion. Okay, that is something that a robotic is trying to do, and that is how to get a robot to move such that it has a continuous force, sustained force, as opposed to more stop and go, if you will. Muscle tone we're talking about is a continuous, a partial contraction, right? And muscle tone allows you to hold up your head, and you can do it for a prolonged period of time because you have alternate usage of the motor unit. Now, of course, if you loses the muscle tone, uh, then you just faint. In other words, okay. So without the muscle tone, the body collapses, if you will. So muscle tone is needed for posture, tautness, the muscle of the neck to turn the lower, and to hold up the head, stands up and sit, if you will. Now, let's do a couple more things, and then we will end it there. Now, there are two types of contraction. Um, there isotonic contraction. Think of the word iso means same. Tonic is strength. So this allows you to have a continuous motion, a continuous motion like this without being so jerky. Okay, so this is isotonic. Okay, isotonic contraction. If it's narrowing, this is known as concentric, like if you do curling. But if you, or we call this flexion or extension, it's called eccentric if it comes out, for example. Now, if you push against the car or the wall, and the wall certainly doesn't move or the car doesn't move, this is called that isometric contraction. Okay, that the muscle fiber doesn't change at all. So we call that isometric. But are you doing any work? Yes, you are, because you're burning up the ATP. Okay. Muscle contraction, if it does not change the length, we call isometric. If it changes the length, but the strength is the same, uh, it's called isotonic. Now, there are different muscle fiber, if you will. The one of the reason, let me go back and say, later on we'll talk about red blood cell. We say that the red blood cell is red because of iron, and the iron is hold on the red blood cell because of there's a molecule called hemoglobin. Now, if and of course iron is what part of the hemoglobin that holds on the oxygen. Now, in skeletal muscle, there's equivalent molecule called myoglobin. Okay, myoglobin. You can see here. Now, red muscle fiber has a lot of myoglobin. Okay, and myoglobin, think of it, binds to oxygen. So that means that it's an oxygen reserve needed for cellular respiration. So red muscle fiber tend to generate a lot of ATP, and because there's a lot of ATP, the muscle does not need to convert pyruvate to to lactic acid. So it if it's no lactic acid, then the muscle is not fatigued. So that's why you say it's the the slow twitch muscle fiber type one. It gets its ATP from oxidative process. It's red because of the myoglobin, but the key is that they're resistant to muscle fatigue. Now there are red muscle fibers and there's white muscle fiber. Okay, the white muscle fiber that you see here, this one, if you will, allow you to do the muscle really quick, right, like this. But if you do this, say for about 10 minutes, you will get into muscle fatigue in which you can't cause it to contract anymore. And so usually fast twitch muscle get its ATP through glycolysis, right? And you can say fast twitch glycolysis. When you get glycolysis, there's a tendency under anaerobic respiration that pyruvate is converted to lactic acid. And thus you will get into fatigue. So they're prone to get muscle fatigue. Fast streak glycolytic, um, they tend to get susceptible to fatigue, like in the hands and the eye, because they get um, a lot of ATP to glycolysis. There's no need to get cellular respiration, so there's no need to have mitochondria. So in these fat twits, you have few mitochondria. Now, the best athlete are the one that really don't have type 1 or type 2B, but rather have type 2A. The type 2A is a type of muscle where it's red muscle fiber, but it's actually it's has this ATP from oxidative. So it's known as intermediate muscle fiber, okay? Oxidative. It's little red because of the myoglobin. But this is the one that is um, fatigue resistant, if you will, almost uh, uh, fatigue resistant. So the type 2A is the one that's fast twitch, but it generates its ATP from oxidative. And so here are three different muscle fiber. I would focus on the red one, which is mostly oxidative, whereas the white one is glycolytic, well, glycolysis, and they tend to be fatigue. Um, and so, maybe an exam question might be is, um, certain athlete depends on the muscle fiber they have. A swimmer, like a fast swimmer, if they endeavor to have fast twitch, that will help them a lot. But say if you're a distant runner and you want to have sustained ATP during your marathon, it's probably best to have this um, oxidative type of muscle fiber, whereas the fast twitch glycolysis, this is like if you want to be involved in like maybe playing certain event that require jerky motion, maybe basketball or climbing and that kind of thing. Whereas a slow, relaxing swim for long distance, you might want to have red muscle fiber oxidative. Um, okay, so a couple more slides. I'm going to say cardiac myocyte to when we talk about the heart um, next week. And that is the cardiac myocyte doesn't need motor neuron to innervate it. It's self-excitatory and it's rhythmic. Okay, it has striation and intercalating disc, and that's all I'm going to talk about the cardiac muscle. A couple more things with the smooth muscle, and then we'll be ended today. Now, um, muscle do have actins and myosin. However, they're not highly um, organized, so therefore they don't have any striation. In fact, in the skeletal muscle, uh, because of striation, if you stretch it out, it's not going to contract very well. So we call that length tension relationship. In smooth muscle, however, you can stretch the smooth muscle and it still can maintain its strength. In fact, a bolus food down the esophagus, when you stretch it, it still can contract. It can still form tension. So it's not subject tension to relationship. And why that might be the case, and that is if you look at the myosins, so basically the myosins in the skeletal muscle is different from the myosins in the smooth muscle. Typically, the myosin in the skeletal muscle have cross bridges at the end, like this, right? And if there's an overlap of actin, this is where they might bind to each other and forms a contraction. But say if you stretch it, right, so that the actins and myosins are only slightly overlapped, like this, it's not going to contract very well, right? Now, in smooth muscle, however, the myosin has cross bridges everywhere, not just the end. They have it everywhere. And so that even if you have a little bit overlap, or if you stretch it, right, it still can retain its tautness, if you will. So the key thing is that the myosin in smooth muscle have cross bridges everywhere, whereas the cross bridges or the myosin's head is only found at the ends in the myosins of the um, skeletal muscle. All right, so smooth muscle resembles skeletal muscle, has the interaction between actins and myosin. It uses calciums and ATP for contraction. However, you do not see a lot of sarcoplasmic reticulum in the smooth muscle. So this calcium that is needed has to come from the outside, extracellular in, okay, into the smooth muscle. It's different from the skeletal muscle and that is electroponin. They do, however, instead of sarcoplasmic reticulum, they have this molecule known as calmodulin. The calmodulin is hold on to calcium. Okay, this one binds to calcium. Uh, it original find that it finds to modulate the level of calcium, so hence the name. Calmodulin binds to calcium. Okay. That what you see. Typically, a neurotransmitter that affected the smooth muscle are acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Uh, Later on, we will see that norepinephrine is a vasoconstrictor. Blood vessel is composed of smooth muscle, but norepinephrine causes the blood vessel to constrict. Okay, so this is known as vasoconstrictor. And certainly some hormones affect smooth muscle. Histamine, for example, is a vasodilator. Histamine is a vasodilator. And play nitric oxide too. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. Okay, and we talked about how smooth muscle stretch, it can still cause a contraction. It's usually slower to contract. Some muscle, particularly um, around in the blood vessel, they work together as one unit, and that is they usually have gap junction, so that if the calcium goes into one muscle cell, it flows all around them. So the smooth muscle can work by itself, one unit, or can work by as a multi-unit. All right, so I'm just going to end it there. Are there any questions? Um,
No, Professor.
so
Thank
all the rest of the slide, um, you can just use this for the lab. I'm not going to discuss them. Okay. Any questions? Sorry. I'm going to stop the